Behind closed doors, US and Canadian representatives have been trying to salvage the North American Free Trade Agreement. The marathon talks began on Tuesday. They're an attempt to get Canada on the same page as the US and Mexico, or risk being left out of the trilateral pact. Thursday evening, discussions spilled into overtime, but signs started to point towards a breakthrough.
I think Canada very much wants to make the deal, and I think it's going to be obviously very good for Canada if they do, and I think it's probably not going to be good at all if they don't.
We covered a lot of ground. The atmosphere remains constructive. There's a lot of goodwill, and we're now going back to do some work based on the conversations we've had.
The neighbors have enjoyed a prosperous trade relationship for years. Canada is the US's second largest trading partner after China. But since President Trump took office, he's taken aim at the $17 billion goods deficit with Canada. Ties turned sour after Trump accused Canada of protecting its dairy and agriculture sector at the expense of US farmers, who are subject to a 270% tariff on their dairy products going into Canada. The two have also placed tariffs on each other's steel and aluminium products. Canada wants to eliminate them, but the US has threatened to turn it up a notch and throw in auto tariffs. And they disagree on Nafta's dispute resolution system. It allows independent panels to resolve conflicts among the three countries. Canada wants to keep it. Trump wants to abolish it. The Nafta revamp is another win for Trump's America First policy. He's also pulled out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, slapped tariffs on longtime trade allies, and threatened to increase duties on up to $500 billion worth of Chinese imports. It's prompted China to lodge complaints at the World Trade Organization. But Trump seems unfazed. Speaking to Bloomberg News on Thursday, Trump threatened to quit the WTO if it doesn't shape up, which could lead to another shakeup in global trade governance. Laila Humaira, TRT World.
Well, for more on this, we're joined by our editor-at-large, Craig Capitas in Paris, and John McLaren in Charlottesville. He's an economics professor at the University of Virginia. Welcome to you both. Craig, if I could start with you. I mean, it did always seem doubtful that the US and Canada would come to a definitive agreement so soon after talks with Mexico ended. I'm wondering, in your view, what are the major sticking points here?
Well, the major sticking point, as Lila said, is Trump doesn't like the WTO, and the WTO demands, 164 member nations demand that there be tribunals to work out these disputes, and there's a reason for that. Because prior to World War II, the European powers imposed harsh trade restrictions against countries outside their empires. Now, Trump is starting to make America act like an empire. That's what led to World War II, or one of the things that led to World War II. So after the war, in 1948, there was this beast created called the General Agreement on Tariff and Trade. And in 1995, that turned into the WTO. 164 countries who decided they were going to sit down and arbitrate this stuff, discuss in panels, and reach a consensus. And Trump wants to dump that, and that's not a good thing.
Yeah, and Craig, I'll talk more about the WTO in a moment with you, but John McLaren, what would happen if the US and Canada couldn't come to an agreement on preserving Nafta? What sort of effect would that have on trade between those two countries, but also with Mexico?
Well, I mean, if Nafta actually came to an end, or if it was junked and replaced with a bilateral agreement between the U.S. and Mexico, that would be really a disaster for a lot of U.S. industry. Since 1994, you know, the U.S. corporations have fine-tuned their supply lines, their value chains, to minimize their costs across the three countries. You know, a lot of American cars are made in Ontario, and a lot of the cars that Canadians buy are made in Michigan or Ohio or in northern Mexico, and a lot of parts of every car are made in all three countries. So you know, if we broke apart this three-country agreement and trashed that and turned it into a two-country agreement, that would throw all those supply lines into chaos. And I think that would be very bad for U.S. workers as well as certainly for U.S. consumers and shareholders.
Mm. And what about this criticism of NAFTA from Trump and those who support him, that NAFTA actually hurts American workers, hurts American industry? Do you subscribe to any of those criticisms?
Well, I could talk about that all day. I mean, in a short, my short answer is when NAFTA was first formed, it did dislocate a lot of blue collar workers in the old style manufacturing industries throughout the United States, and that did cause some hardship. And I don't think that policymakers were properly prepared for that dislocation and those redistributions of income that occurred as a result at the time. But that doesn't mean that blue-collar workers in the United States would be helped now, a quarter of a century later, by tearing up the agreement, because the whole business environment has been completely re-engineered to take advantage of NAFTA. At this point, it would just be another dislocation and throw the labor market into chaos. I fully believe.
Okay, Craig, let's talk more about Donald Trump's threat to withdraw from the WTO. I mean, what sort of effect would that have on the organisation? I mean, remembering that it was the US back in 94, 95 who actually led the charge to set up the organisation.
Well, I have a double-barreled answer for that. He cannot unilaterally walk away from the World Trade Organization. That would require a joint resolution by the United States Congress before they could withdraw. Why Trump is doing this with each passing day becomes more and more of a mystery to me, as I think it is to John, who wrote the book on this stuff, a book called International Trade. It is the textbook on this subject. But nowadays, even if you look at John's book, or you look at Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, or his theory of moral sentiments, you cannot find any rationale for this. And I think you have to go back further to figure out what's going on here. And as John got his PhD in philosophy, he'll know what I speak of when I say de rerum natura, on the nature of things, which was a poem by a guy called Lucretius a long, long time ago. And this is kind of like one of the foundations of Western thought. And basically it says that nature ceaselessly experiments, and there's many false starts and dead ends. And Trump, I think, is one of those dead ends. And that what he's doing is he's creating an obstacle here. And the greatest obstacle, according to de rerum natura, the greatest obstacle to pleasure is not pain, it's delusion. And I think that's what we're seeing here at this point. I think it's extremely hard to apply normal economic theory to what Donald Trump is doing.
Interesting. John McLaren, before we let you go, in this Bloomberg interview, Trump also had a go at the European Union, saying that it's almost as bad as China and rejecting the EU's offer to scrap tariffs on cars, which is one of the major issues that he had with European trade. I mean, he's a hard man to please, isn't he? But what does he ultimately want to do in terms of trade with Europe?
Well, I'm also a little bit mystified about what the end goal is. I think with all these disputes, what he would claim is he is being a little bit of a bully and talking tough in order to get a better deal, to get more concessions from the other side down the road than you would have had. Still win-win, but we win more and they win a little bit less because they're afraid of what I'm going to do if I don't get my way. And that may conceivably work out, but I think what he doesn't take into account is that all this bluster and bullying also creates a huge amount of uncertainty. And uncertainty, policy uncertainty, there's been a lot of research in recent years that has shown it's something that's really bad for business. And it's bad for investment, and it's bad for trade flows. Business leaders trying to make their decisions now have no idea what's going to happen a month from now, 6 months from now, a year from now in trade policy. and their rational decision is going to be put off investments and make decisions later, and that's going to be costly down the road.
Okay, interesting times for trade around the world, of course. Let's leave the conversation there. Editor-at-Large Craig Capetas and John McLaren in Charlottesville, thank you to you both.